Now we're going to talk about grief. Grief refers to the emotional and psychological response that we have to any significant loss. The most significant thing that we can lose in our lives is a relationship. And so we grieve over breakups, we grieve over divorces, and of course at later stages in life you grieve over the death of a loved one. Grief is inevitable, it is also extremely painful. And understanding what happens to you through this grieving process can help you, hopefully, to come to terms with it a little better. Grief is looked at largely from this model of 5 stages of grief, which was developed by a very wonderful and influential writer called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote a book called Death and Dying, based on 20 years of experience of working with the terminally ill. We now use the same paradigm to kind of understand all grief relationships, though it has been expanded and contracted and stuff by other people, but this is broadly it. When I say stages here, we don't really think that, you start at stage 1 and move to 2, 3, 4 in order very neatly. Sometimes you can jump in the middle and then go back and then move forward. Sometimes you may skip a stage completely. This is not like some very rigid formula. But broadly, you start with turmoil, you end with peace. And that's the process that happens. So the first stage, according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is denial. Denial is where you're kind of not really registering that this is happening. So in a breakup, if you're saying, yeah, this is just a fight, but we fought so many times, I know he'll come back, she will not stay angry with me. Sometimes you might be in denial. Of course, with an illness or end of life stages, sometimes also you're denying that this is what's really happening. This is kind of nature's way of just giving you a little break. It's like it's given you the information and then it's just giving you a little time to kind of come to terms with it. And going through a period of shock or numbness or paralysis or apathy or denial, actually you might be just storing your resources so that you can get into the next phases subsequently. The next phase that we talk about is anger. Anger is something that we experience when we perceive something as unfair, or when we perceive that there is some kind of a threat, a psychological or a physical threat to us. And loss can often feel like both. And so anger is a very common and again natural emotion to have, one which we need not really push away, but should try to experience. In the context of a relationship, breaking up, it can be anger at the partner. Sometimes it's anger at yourself. Sometimes it's anger at a third person, her mother, his brother, whoever you hold responsible for your loss, you feel that anger towards. And while it's important to feel it, I would say initial stages maybe don't express it because some of that anger might be unwarranted. The next stage that we can think of is bargaining. Okay, so I've tried to say it's not really ending, then I've got really pissed off that it's ending, and now I'm trying to sort of negotiate and keep it from ending. Okay, so just let her live through this and I'll be a good person for the rest of my life. Or stay with me this one time and I won't make those same mistakes again. We try to negotiate this. This can be a time of some energy and it can be a time of some hopefulness. If the bargaining fails, we go to the next stage, which is depression. Here, you feel the loss. You feel the sadness. You feel hopeless. You feel miserable. You feel like this is just not something that I can manage or live with. And what's the point? Why bother? Why go on? Is something that people who are depressed often say about themselves. From depression eventually, and this can take between 2 months and 2 years, really. There is no very strict time frame saying that this is how long you can grieve and now you should move on. But from depression, eventually you move on to sort of acceptance and meaning making. Life does go on and you do need to keep doing things, and even after the loss, sometimes you try to keep life the same. But you meet one new person, or you start one new habit, or you restart old habits that you have, and slowly these things can start to feel slightly better for you. So before we move on to the next bit, I just want to pause over here to talk a little bit about how to respond to someone who's grieving, because we often tell grieving people, share, get social support, talk to people. Yeah, but the other person may not really know what to do in that situation. Broadly, it's more important to sort of be there for the person, to let them know that I care for you, I'm here for you, and if there's anything that you need, I'm happy to do it for you. This leaves them feeling supported and held. What is less useful is sort of platitudes or advice. When you've just been dumped, you really don't want to know that there are many fish in the sea. It's not so interesting. You also, sometimes the solution which worked for you may not work for the person you're advising. So you may say that the best way to get over a relationship is to get into another relationship as quickly as possible. It worked for me. But the person in front of you, it may not work for. So on the whole, try not to speak, try to be there and listen, and that's the most helpful thing you can do. Now, while grief is inevitable, as I said, and it is natural and it's normal, sometimes we can have what we call complicated grief, where either the distress about the separation or the feeling of trauma, avoidance, unhappiness from that is fairly intense and remains intense for a long period of time. Cognitive behavior therapists have sort of come up with a bunch of beliefs that can perpetuate the grief experience, maybe beyond its appropriate duration. A grief experience, it makes us question life. So what does this really say about me? What does it say about life? What does this say about God? Is this how things work? And when you feel that my fundamental belief system has to either be overhauled or I have to remain in this very unhappy, frustrated state, that can be a problem. Our traditional depressive cognitions of helplessness, hopelessness, and worthlessness, of course, are also common in grief. Apart from that, sometimes a grieving person can take too much responsibility for what's going on. This relationship ended because I am a screw-up. Okay, or this person died because I could not take care of them. When you take too much blame and too much responsibility for the problem onto yourself, that's something that's hard to let go of. Negative reactions from people, community, family members can also complicate grief further. There are some things which, people think you shouldn't really be grieving over. So parents may be impatient with their teenagers' breakup. Like, what's the big deal? Move on. So that also can be a problem. There's also, I think, with many people, the feeling that if I stop grieving, it means I never cared. And so I can't stop grieving. I must remain sad. And this, of course, is a very difficult idea, I think, to challenge or to work with. From my clinical experience, especially in terms of breakups of relationships, whether relationships or marriages, I'd say the belief that you can only love once. That love is something which can happen once, and if this has ended, I can never feel like this again. There is no one who can meet these needs for me again. That definitely compounds and complicates the amount of grief that you're feeling. If you're feeling so miserable, and if you're experiencing these kinds of complications and cognitions, then do reach out for help, because this is not something that you can handle all on your own.